With a population of over 1.4 billion people, China is not only the most populous country on Earth, but also the epicenter of the world's pork production and consumption.
China is home to half of the world's 1.3 billion pigs, and Chinese people consume half of all pork on the planet. This remarkable dominance didn't happen by accident. Rather, it emerged from a surprising transformation where China turned a wild boar crisis into a massive meat industry. However, the journey from traditional small-scale farming to industrial supremacy faced significant challenges. How did that even happen? And what changed behind the scenes that nobody is talking about? Stay close, because this story goes much deeper. Understanding the wild boar crisis in China. A strange situation slowly built up over the years, and anyone paying close attention could not help but wonder how wild boars managed to spread so widely across farming regions and turn into such a serious problem. At first glance, wild boars might not seem like animals that could cause this level of trouble, but a deeper look revealed a chain of events that quietly stacked on top of each other. One key detail stood out right away. Female wild boars reached maturity before even turning 1 year old. Now think about that for a second. How often does any animal reproduce that early and that quickly? With better access to food, reproduction did not just happen fast, reproduction sped up even more. A single female could produce 2 litters every year, and each litter could contain 6 to 10 piglets. That alone sounded like a lot, but the real shock came next. Those piglets could also begin reproducing in about 8 months. So what happened when this cycle repeated again and again without interruption? Numbers did not just grow, numbers exploded. A simple example made everything clearer. About 100 females could turn into more than 1,600 pigs in just 1 year. That kind of growth almost sounded unreal, but that was exactly what began to happen across many regions. At the same time, another important piece of the puzzle quietly disappeared. Natural predators like wolves and lynx, which once kept wild boar populations under control, became rare or vanished completely from many areas. Without these predators, wild boars faced far fewer threats in the wild. A simple question came up. What happens when a fast-breeding animal no longer has anything hunting it? The answer showed up clearly in rising numbers year after year. Climate also played a role that many people might not immediately think about. Winters became warmer, and that change reduced the number of animals that would normally die during harsh cold seasons. Fewer deaths meant more survivors, and more survivors meant even faster population growth. It all started to connect like pieces of a puzzle. Agriculture also changed in ways that accidentally helped wild boars thrive. As farming methods modernized, some lands that were not ideal for crops turned into forest areas. These new forest spaces became perfect feeding grounds for wild boars. Food sources like mushrooms, acorns, and beechnuts became widely available. Now imagine a fast-breeding animal, with no predators, living in an environment filled with food and fewer dangers. Would any population stay small under those conditions? That question almost answered itself. Numbers that once seemed manageable began to skyrocket. Back in the early 1970s, about 35,000 wild boars were recorded as being removed in some regions. Fast forward to 2021, and that number climbed past 800,000. That kind of jump did not happen by accident. That was the result of several factors all working together at the same time. Then came the impact on agriculture, and this was where the situation became impossible to ignore. Wild boars did not just eat crops. Wild boars destroyed land in a way that made farming extremely difficult. Through a behavior known as rooting, wild boars dug into the soil while searching for food. In just 1 minute, a single animal could disturb more than 6 square feet of land. That might not sound like much at first, but what happened when dozens or even hundreds of animals did the same thing across a field? Fields turned uneven, soil got flipped over, and carefully planted crops were ruined. A serious question started to rise among farmers. How could any farm survive repeated damage like that? The financial impact quickly became overwhelming. Estimates showed that feral swine caused about $2.5 billion in damage every year. Crops like corn, wheat, Soybeans, rice, peanuts, and sugarcane became easy targets. These were not small losses. These were the kinds of losses that could affect food supply and income at the same time. But the damage did not stop at crops. Rooting and wallowing, which involved rolling in mud and digging up land, caused up to 95% of total crop destruction in some areas. Fields turned into rough, uneven ground filled with deep ruts. Tractors struggled to move across such land, and simple farm work became harder than ever. Another disturbing detail came into focus when looking at livestock. Wild boars did not only feed on plants, wild boars also attacked young animals like lambs, goats, and calves. The scent of afterbirth attracted these animals, and that created dangerous situations for farmers trying to protect newborn livestock. A difficult question followed. How could farmers guard both crops and animals at the same time against such a persistent threat? The challenge became even more serious when disease entered the picture. Wild boars carried and spread diseases such as African swine fever, classical swine fever, pseudorabies, and brucellosis. These diseases could spread to farm animals and cause major losses. That meant the problem was not only about physical damage. The problem also involved health risks that could affect entire herds. Efforts to control the growing population faced major obstacles. Studies showed that about 66% of the wild boar population needed to be removed every single year just to keep numbers from increasing further. Think about that requirement for a moment. Removing more than half of a population every year just to stay at the same level sounded extremely difficult. Many methods were tested, but results often fell short. Devices like propane cannons were used to scare animals away from fields. At first, these devices worked. Loud noises drove animals away temporarily, but how long could fear last? Wild boars quickly got used to the sound, and the effect faded. Fencing also seemed like a possible solution, but the cost quickly became a problem. Protecting 100,000 acres required about $5 million and more than 100,000 hours of labor. That level of effort made fencing unrealistic for many farmers. Another question came to mind. How many farms could afford such an expensive and time-consuming solution? The answer explained why fencing did not become a widespread fix. Lethal control methods became the most effective option, but even those methods faced limits. No single approach could handle the scale of the problem across large areas of land. Farmers and landowners spent huge amounts of money trying to manage wild boar populations. In 2021 alone, about $474 million went into control efforts across different regions. Livestock producers also invested more than 12 million labor hours dealing with wild boars. That meant time, money, and energy all went into a problem that still continued to grow. Looking at the full situation, everything connected in a clear but troubling way. Fast reproduction, fewer predators, warmer climates, and abundant food sources created the perfect conditions for wild boar populations to rise. At the same time, damage to crops, threats to livestock, and the spread of disease made the impact impossible to ignore. Control efforts showed how difficult it was to reverse a problem once it reached such a large scale. A final question lingered quietly. Could earlier action have prevented this situation, or was this outcome always going to happen once all these factors came together? That question remained open, but one thing became clear. Managing wild boar populations was never simple. It demanded constant effort, sharp planning, and real awareness of nature's unpredictability. But how did things spiral this far? Stay till the end. How it started. The early days of pig domestication in China come up, and the whole process feels less like control and more like a quiet partnership that slowly built itself over thousands of years. Evidence from genetics and archaeology shows that this relationship began somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago, with some of the earliest traces found at Jiahu in Henan province, where pig bones dating back about 9,000 years were discovered. That detail alone makes the mind pause for a moment. How does a connection between humans and animals last for that long and still shape everyday life today? The explanation shared by experts points to something simple and almost natural. Wild boars started moving closer to human settlements, not because of force, not because of cages, but because of opportunity. Food scraps, leftover crops, and household waste created an easy feeding ground. Over time, these animals became more comfortable around human spaces. Humans noticed the pattern and began to see value. A quiet exchange started to take shape. Wild animals found steady food, and humans found a steady source of meat, and something even more important that might not be obvious at first glance. Could something as simple as waste turn into a valuable resource? That question leads straight into one of the most interesting parts of the relationship, which is how pigs were not just raised for meat, but played a much bigger role inside daily life. Pigs became what many described as living recycling systems. Household waste did not go to waste at all. Leftover food, crop remains, and even materials that could not be eaten by humans were fed to pigs. In return, pigs produced manure that became a powerful fertilizer for crops. That cycle created a system where almost nothing was lost. Pigsties were often built in very practical ways, sometimes even connected directly to latrines and waste areas so that feeding remained constant and efficient. It sounds almost too organized for such an early time, right? Yet this system worked so well that pig manure often held more value than the meat itself. Crops needed nutrients to grow, and that manure provided exactly what was needed. So the real question becomes, was the pig more important alive than slaughtered? In many ways, the answer leaned toward yes, because a single animal could keep fields fertile for a long time. Life in rural China before the 1980s brings another layer to this story. And this is where things start to feel even more grounded and personal. Pig farming was not some large industrial process. Instead, it lived inside backyards, inside small family spaces, and inside daily routines. Around 180 million farmers raised pigs, and more than 80% of rural households kept about 2 or 3 pigs each. That number alone paints a clear picture. Almost every family had some connection to pig farming. These animals were not fed rich or expensive diets. Most of the food given to pigs came from plant materials with very little protein. Because of that, pigs took around 200 days to reach a size ready for slaughter. That feels slow compared to modern farming, but at that time, speed was not the main focus. Survival, balance, and sustainability mattered more. Annual pork consumption stayed quite low, around 7 kilograms per person. That detail might sound surprising today. Why so little? Especially when pigs were so common. The answer connects deeply to culture and timing. Pork was not an everyday meal. Pork was something special, something saved for big moments like the spring festival. Families would prepare and enjoy pork during celebrations, and fat from pigs, known as lard, was preserved and used for cooking throughout the year. That careful use shows a level of planning that feels very thoughtful. Nothing was wasted, and everything had a purpose. Another fascinating layer comes from the wide variety of pig breeds developed across China over thousands of years. Through long periods of selection and adaptation, around 108 local pig breeds and strains appeared, each suited to specific environments and conditions. That kind of diversity raises an interesting thought. How did farmers manage to create so many different types without modern science? The answer lies in observation, patience, and tradition passed down through generations. One of the most well-known breeds, the Meishan pig, became famous for an almost unbelievable trait. A single litter could include 15 to 16 piglets. That level of reproduction made the breed extremely valuable. But here is where expectations might shift a little. These pigs were not chosen for fast growth or lean meat. Instead, value came from high fat content and the quality of lard produced. That detail might sound unusual in a world that often focuses on lean meat today. But at that time, fat was energy, flavor, and an essential part of cooking. So the real question becomes, what defines value in food? Is it speed, size, or usefulness over time? Cultural meaning adds the final layer to this long story, and this is where pigs move beyond farming and enter the world of symbols and identity. In Chinese writing, the character for home or family combines a roof with a pig underneath. That image says a lot without needing many words. A household was not complete without a pig. A pig represented stability, food security, and a sense of comfort. Pork itself became so central that the general word for meat often referred to pork by default. Other meats had to be named separately as cow meat or chicken meat. That small detail says something powerful. Pork was not just one type of meat among many. Pork was the standard. Pigs also became symbols of prosperity and health, especially because pork was saved for important celebrations. So when a family had pork to share, that moment carried meaning beyond just eating. It represented success, planning, and a kind of quiet wealth. Looking at everything together, the whole journey feels less like a simple farming practice and more like a deep, long relationship built on need, observation, and balance. From wild boars wandering closer to human settlements, to carefully managed backyard systems, to cultural symbols that still exist today, pigs became part of daily life in a way that feels almost inseparable. And perhaps the most interesting question still lingers quietly in the background. Did humans truly domesticate pigs, or did pigs ease their way into human life? Stay glued, because everything shifts next. The Industrial Revolution. Back around 1980, pig farming in China looked very different. Mostly small setups, local breeds, and methods passed down over generations. Then, something new entered the picture. A model from the United States, developed in the 1970s, started making its way in. At first, the change seemed gradual, almost quiet. But was it really quiet? Or was something bigger already building beneath the surface? By the 1980s, and especially the 1990s, that Western factory farming approach began to take hold in a serious way. The government pushed hard into breeding science and partnered with American experts, and slowly, traditional pig raising started to shift into large-scale, controlled environments. Communes and backyard systems gave way to organized industrial operations. That alone sounds like a big shift, but what really pushed things forward came later. Then came 2018, and everything sped up almost overnight. African swine fever hit, and the impact was massive. Pig numbers dropped sharply, and supply could not keep up with demand. So what happens when a country depends heavily on pork and suddenly faces a shortage? Prices went up, pressure increased, and the need for a solution became urgent. Within just 3 years, a full transformation took place. Small farms that once dominated the landscape started disappearing, and in their place came massive facilities, some holding close to 500,000 pigs. Everything inside these farms became controlled. Feeding, temperature, health checks, even waste removal, all handled through automated systems. Then a new idea came in 2019 when the government allowed high-rise pig farms. That sounds unusual at first, right? Multi-story buildings filled with animals? But that decision triggered a building boom across major pig-producing regions. At the same time, something else changed quietly but deeply. Traditional pig breeds, which had adapted over centuries to local environments, started fading out. Farms began using imported breeds or mixed versions based on Western genetics. Why make that switch? The answer came down to efficiency. Faster growth, leaner meat, and more predictable production. But then a question comes up. What gets lost when efficiency becomes the main goal? Local traits, resilience, and diversity slowly gave way to uniformity. The pigs became more standardized, almost like products designed for output, rather than animals shaped by environment. As all this unfolded, large corporations stepped in and took a bigger role. About 2/3 of pork production moved into the hands of major agribusiness companies. One major moment came in 2013 when WH Group bought Smithfield, an American pork producer, becoming the largest pork company in the world. That move showed how global the industry had become. Then companies like Muyuan Foods started building enormous complexes, some with multiple buildings, each several floors high, producing millions of pigs every year. It almost sounds like something out of a different kind of industry, not traditional farming anymore. So another question naturally comes up. At what point does farming start to feel more like manufacturing? Government support played a huge role in making all this happen. Banks were instructed to give loans, especially when pork prices surged. Subsidies were offered depending on the size of operations, with larger farms receiving more support. Over time, the numbers told the full story. Large and medium farms grew significantly, while small farms declined sharply. Pig-rearing households dropped by more than 70% over a couple of decades. That is not just a small change, that is a complete restructuring of how food gets produced. Technology then stepped in and changed the game even more. Multi-story pig farms became common, with some buildings reaching incredible heights. One complex could hold tens of thousands of breeding pigs and produce over 1 million animals every year. That scale alone raises questions. How does management even keep track of so many animals? This is where technology companies entered the scene. Systems powered by artificial intelligence started tracking each pig. Weight, age, food intake, movement, everything recorded. Some systems even used visual recognition based on markings on the pigs' bodies. Others monitored sounds to detect distress or possible danger. Infrared sensors tracked temperature, and cough detection systems warned about disease early. It almost sounds like a high-tech lab instead of a farm. Even companies known for completely different industries joined in. One major internet company developed its own pig farming division and refined methods over years. That might sound surprising at first. Why would a tech company focus on farming? But when thinking about data, monitoring, and systems, the connection starts to make sense. Automation reduced the need for human labor, and land use became more efficient. High-rise farms used a fraction of the space required by traditional farms. Feeding systems adjusted diets precisely, reducing waste and improving output. Then comes the recovery phase after the crisis. The African swine fever outbreak caused huge losses. Pig numbers dropped by more than a quarter in just 1 year. That is a massive hit. Prices increased, and dependence on imports grew. But the recovery that followed turned out to be faster than many expected. Within a few years, production started rising again, even surpassing previous levels in some periods. Investment poured in, reaching tens of billions of euros. By 2021, herd size had already returned to a large portion of pre-outbreak levels. One interesting detail stood out. Farmers who had faced disease outbreaks before seemed better prepared to recover. Experience with past crises appeared to improve decision-making and resilience. That raises an important thought. Does hardship sometimes build stronger systems in the long run? It seems like that might be part of the answer here. Looking at everything together, the shift feels almost like a complete transformation from one world to another. Small-scale, local farming turned into large-scale, technology-driven production. Traditional breeds gave way to standardized genetics. Human labor reduced, while machines and data took over. And through all of this, one question refuses to fade. Is this the future of farming everywhere, or something uniquely shaped? What's happening now might just surprise you. Stay till the end. How it's going now. A full picture of the pork industry starts to come into view once current numbers are laid out in a simple way. And honestly, the scale alone can make anyone pause for a second. Production reportedly reached about 59.38 million tons in 2025, which already sounds massive. And then came the detail that this marked a 4.1% increase from the previous year. That kind of growth naturally raises a quiet question. What keeps pushing such steady expansion year after year? The answers seem to sit in demand, population size, and long-standing food habits. China alone accounted for roughly half of global pork production, and that figure almost feels hard to process at first. Half of the world's pork coming from one country? That leads to another thought. How large must the pig population be to support something like that? Data showed that the pig herd stood at about 429.67 million head by December 2025. Just imagining that number brings another layer of curiosity. How does any system manage animals at that scale without constant pressure on resources? Slaughter numbers added even more weight to the picture, with about 719.73 million hogs processed in 2025, reflecting a 2.4% increase compared to the previous year. Pork alone made up around 60% of the entire meat industry output, which made one thing very clear. Pork was not just another protein source. Pork stood at the center of the entire meat system. Looking deeper into the structure of the market, concentration among producers began to stand out. Large companies continued to take stronger positions, and one name kept appearing at the top. WH Group held the position as the world's largest pork company, especially after the acquisition of Smithfield Foods back in 2013. That move reshaped the global market in a way that still shows impact today. Another question started to form. How much control do a few companies really have over such a large industry? Domestic producers also showed strong growth, with Muyuan Foodstuff leading through a sow population of about 2.62 million. Wen's Group followed with around 1.8 million sows, which again pointed to how large individual operations had become. The top 20 producers together released about 198.68 million head in 2023, capturing somewhere between 27.59% and 36.12% of total output, depending on the source of the data. That range alone tells something interesting. Even with slight differences in reporting, concentration remained significant. Government plans added another layer, aiming to push the top 10 producers to hold around 40% of the market. That goal raised a simple but important question. Would higher concentration bring efficiency, or would such control limit competition over time? Trade patterns told a slightly different story, and this part felt almost surprising when compared to production levels. Pork imports dropped to around 1 million tons in 2025, which reflected an 8% decline from the previous year. At first glance, that might seem small compared to total production, and that thought leads to another question. Why import at all when domestic output remains so large? The answer seemed tied to specific cuts, pricing differences, and supply balancing. Spain held the position as the leading supplier with about 28% market share, followed by Brazil at 22%. The European Union played a strong role in offal supply, covering about 52% of that segment. Even with these imports, total imported pork accounted for only about 4% of overall consumption. That detail made something very clear. Domestic production still carried the weight of feeding the population. Consumption patterns added another layer of insight, and this part felt almost like a story of long-term change. Per capita consumption reached about 70 kilograms per year by 2022, and that number reflected an 18-fold increase since 1962. That kind of growth does not happen overnight. It reflects decades of rising incomes, urbanization, and shifting diets. Pork alone reached about 57 million tons consumed in 2021, reinforcing its dominant position. But then came an interesting shift. Around 28% of consumers reportedly planned to reduce pork intake. That raised a thoughtful question. Could such a strong tradition begin to change over time? Diet diversification already hinted at that possibility, with poultry ranking second at about 25 million tons. A slow transition seemed to be taking shape, not necessarily replacing pork, but adding more variety to everyday meals. Environmental and health concerns began to close the loop, and this part carried a heavier tone. Livestock waste reached around 3 billion metric tons each year, and hog farming alone contributed about 1.29 billion tons of that total. That figure alone raised an unavoidable question. How does any environment absorb waste at that scale without long-term impact? Land use added another layer of pressure, with about 94 hogs per 100 acres of cropland, roughly 4 times the ratio seen in the United States. That comparison made the intensity of production even clearer. Another concern came from antibiotic use. China led global veterinary antibiotic consumption, and that trend raised ongoing worries about resistance. This naturally led to a broader question. What happens when treatment tools begin to lose effectiveness over time? Feed production also surged, reaching about 342.25 million tons in 2025. That number tied everything together. More animals required more feed required more land and resources, and the cycle continued to expand. When everything came together, the industry revealed a balance between growth, demand, efficiency, and pressure on systems. Production numbers showed strength, market concentration showed structure, trade showed support, consumption showed habits, and environmental factors showed limits. Each part connected to the next in a way that felt both impressive and complex. One thought remained at the center of everything. How long can such rapid scale continue before deeper changes become necessary? With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.